Nobody has the perfect faith journey. We experience many ups and downs throughout it. Hi, I'm Cora, and this is Talk 2, Who Am I in Relation to God? Growing up, my family had always gone to church. I was part of Sunday school growing up and was confirmed as well. I believed that there was a God, but I hadn't seemed to experience it like everyone else had. I wasn't connecting with him how I felt I should have. My grandpa had been my support system since I first could remember. He was there for me through some of the hardest things I had to face. Last February, my grandpa's health had declined fast. My grandma had let me know earlier that day that I should pray for him, so I did. I didn't think about it at all. Later that night, me and my mom had gone to see him. When I got to his place, I sat down right next to him, and he grabbed my hand. He wasn't so sure who I was until I said, "Hi, Grandpa," and he said with a big smile on his face, "I'm so glad you are here, Miss Rose." I stayed down in Iowa for the next couple of days with my grandpa. My sisters had ended up coming down with my mom. I would sit by my grandpa during the day while people ran errands or slept, and at night I'd be at the hotel room with my sister and my two younger sisters. Most of the nights, my mom would leave because my grandpa wasn't having a good time. So I would stay up with my little sister Rebecca, watching cartoons and rubbing her back till she could fall asleep. During this time, I had been mad at God. I was taking it out on people around me who really cared and wanted to help me. One day, I had gone to see my grandpa. I sat down next to him and I held his hand. My grandma, mom, and aunts were all in the room sitting with him. My grandpa wasn't conscious, but he could still hear what you were saying. My Aunt Barb had pulled out my grandpa's Bible and opened to his favorite verse. Psalms 23, 1-6. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right path for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all of my days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That day, my family had all decided to go home and get some rest. That night, before I went to bed, I read Psalms 23 and I prayed for the first time in a while. I prayed that my grandpa wouldn't be in pain anymore or struggle. Early that morning, my grandma had called me saying that my grandpa had passed away. It was the worst news I could hear. It hadn't hit me yet, and I was still really shocked. I ended up going to school that morning, and all of a sudden it hit me. My mom had ended up picking me up during my second hour class. I got into my mom's car and just fell apart. Isaiah 43:2. When you go through deep waters, I will be with you. A couple days later, we ended up going back down to Iowa for the weekend, for the visitation and funeral. I felt like I had to act tough and be strong because everyone was worried about my mom, aunts, and grandma, how they were feeling. We had all been impacted by this, but I felt as if people forgot how close me and my grandpa were. My uncle who lived in Georgia had seen how close we were. He had come over to meet me at the visitation and hugged me. He whispered to me, "Cora, it's okay to cry." And I sat there and bawled into his arms. I had felt as if God saw me hurting and had sent someone to comfort me. Romans 8:18. The pain that you have been feeling cannot compare to the joy that is coming. The next couple months, I struggled, but I also started praying so much. I started seeing God in the little things. For example, my little sister Rebecca has the biggest, happiest smile that I know, and sometimes if I had a rough day, I look forward to seeing her at the end of the day. I started looking for Bible verses to help me out. And let me tell you, people, there are verses for literally everything. The easiest way I find them is to Google them. Once I see one I really like, I'll grab my Bible and highlight that verse so I have it. I'm going to be honest, I'm not a big Bible reader, but there's so much in the Bible, and if you memorize some verses, you'll always have them. If you know someone who could use a verse you found, you can easily tell them it. Because honestly, you have no idea how much that could impact them. For me, reading verses and praying has made a big difference in my relation to God. Most of the time now, I pray without even thinking. I still don't have the perfect relationship with God, but nobody does. There are still times I catch myself in doubt, but I find my way back. Some of you might think you have to go to church every Sunday to have a good relationship with God, but that's not the case. God doesn't keep tabs on who's at church every Sunday. However, finding a church that you can worship in and feel comfortable in is a great feeling to have, because you are surrounded mostly by people who share the love of God in that environment. Deuteronomy 10:21. He is the one you praise. He is your God, who performed for you those great and awesome wonders you saw with your own eyes. The last couple of my years have been my biggest faith test. I've overcome a very abusive relationship, the loss of my grandpa, and doubts that I have had about God. I hadn't really realized how far I'd come in my faith journey until I started writing this talk. I've learned that prayer doesn't have to be perfect, because let me let you on in a little secret. There is no right way to pray. You can literally pray however you want. How I see it, it is a conversation between you and God. 1 John 5:14. This is the confidence we have in approaching God, that if we ask anything according to Him, He will hear us. I used to have a hard time thinking if God really answered our prayers, because I hadn't seemed to see it. A couple months ago, I had a friend whose friendship had become toxic. I prayed about it for weeks on what to do. He'd been one of my closest friends when I'd gone through everything with my grandpa. Finally, I talked to my mom about the situation, and it clicked that sometimes people are only meant to be in your life to teach you things, but it doesn't mean that they have to stay in your life. I had ended up cutting off this friend. I prayed that they would change their ways, but they didn't, so I changed mine. Sometimes we don't always see what God is trying to put or take in and out of our lives. We might think our path is the right way, so we walk on the path until we realize that it was just a detour of what God had actually had in mind for us. Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. My song is You Say by Lauren Daigle.